January 1943. Detroit, Arsenal, Michigan. The floor shakes like thunder as another turret ring slides into place, not for a masterpiece, but for the next one and the next after that. This is the heresy of modern war victories are cast in schedules, not in sculptures. While posters praise elite killers and perfectionists polish impossible tolerances, the battlefield keeps a different ledger. How many arrive today? How many run tomorrow? How many can be replaced by Friday? Germany will sculpt fear into steel. America will repeat a miracle until enemy runs out of answers. Follow the math breaks myths, quantity wins. Berlin's creed is precision as destiny. If a weapon is flawless, victory is inevitable. If tolerances are exquisite, fear will do the rest. The Tiger becomes the altarpiece of that faith, thick armor, fine machining optics that read a battlefield like scripture. Workshops behave like ateliers, master fitters, nursing gearboxes, track links weighed like jewelry, final drives rebuilt with a surgeon's patience. It kills beautifully and consumes time even more beautifully. Every upgrade is a debate. Every spare part a pilgrimage through a wounded rail net. Production is choreography without a chorus skilled exact slow. Monthly numbers arrive like rare vintages admired more than poured. Meanwhile, drawings grow more intricate assemblies, more specialized interdependencies tighter than a watch spring. A bomb on one jig silences 5 suppliers. A missing alloy stalls a line. Quality is worshipped. Cadence is an afterthought. The front asks for replacements. The factory answers with masterpieces. Crews at the edge learn a cruel math availability is a weapon too. A battalion that begins with promise dwindles to a museum tour. Machines waiting on parts, commanders waiting on railcars that will not come. Perfection keeps its promises, just not on time. In war, late excellence loses to adequacy multiplied. They laughed because the blueprint told them to. In the German design imagination, a war-winning tank had to be the sum of difficult things: thick armor at precise hardness, a gun whose tolerances were whispered rather than measured, a gearbox that shifted like a watch, optics ground as if for a cathedral window. The Tiger was that catechism in steel. Every major assembly, final drives, turret, traverse, recoil, cylinders, cooling baffles, was a small thesis, each demanding specialists' fixtures and time. Plates had to be aligned to unforgiving mill standards, welds peened and dressed, edges heat-treated so they would not bloom with cracks under the 88's recoil. You do not run such a line, you shepherd it. Cost hides in verbs, remachine, rework, hand-fit. A Tiger's armor was not simply thick, it was thick to a target. Brunel number that drifted with alloy shortages and had to be corrected in furnace cycles that stole hours you could not invoice to the front. Its gear trains did not merely mesh, they were lapped into marriage by artisans whose wrists remembered the pressure. Each site unit asked for glass ground from a supply chain already limping, then aligned in jigs that bombing could silence with one crater. Procurement officers learned to bargain with scarcity. Production managers learned to fear calendars. Time became a second currency more precious than Reichsmarks. Subcontractors queued on one another like boxcars if a heat exchanger slipped. 2 days the hull waited in a bay that could not be used for anything else. If a set of road wheels missed a shipment, the hull sat on blocks while foremen invented new words. Documentation yoked complexity to fragility, change one thread pitch on a coupling, and a dozen tool sets went wrong. The learning curve, so beloved by economists, flattened when the thing learned was start over. Small numbers were not an accident. They were a signature. Masterpieces are rare on purpose. The line yielded Tigers like a winery yields vintage bottles admired, labeled, soldiered out with pride. In field workshops, the same logic held. A final drive did not get swapped. It got persuaded, shimmied, cursed, gently violated by knowledge only a few men had and only some units could keep. Availability bled out through excellence. A battalion table of equipment looked strong at dawn and thin by dusk, not because crews failed, but because the machine's beauty refused to be rushed. So they mocked the other side. They saw castings with liberal radii and called them crude, saw fasteners you could buy by the sack and called them agricultural, saw powertrains sourced from multiple families and sneered at mongrels. They called the American medium a stove, a tractor, a stamped tin optimism on tracks. They believed that a culture that trusted rivets and interchangeable parts must be unserious about war. To them, the Shermans' design language, modular, tolerant, easily trained, announced inferiority. A machine that did not require master craftsmen to assemble could not possibly require master tacticians to defeat. Underneath the laughter, a different math worked in silence. Complexity magnifies risk. Cost multiplies delay. Time compounds both. In a production system tangled by precision and scarcity, excellence becomes hostage to any single failure. You can budget money. You cannot budget luck. The tiger's greatness was true at the muzzle and false at the calendar. Numbers would decide which truth mattered. The American problem was not romance, it was rhythm. Armies were moving faster than replacements, faster than depots, faster than the training pipeline that fed crews into steel. At Kasserine, at Salerno, and along hedgerows that turned maps into mazes, commanders discovered that the most decisive statistic was not muzzle velocity or armor thickness, it was ready this morning. Units needed vehicles that started, ran, and could be made to start and run again by people who had slept 4 hours and owned one good wrench. They needed them in hundreds, then in thousands, and they needed them on a timetable that artillery could plan around. This is where a philosophy, not a part, enters the story. Mass production for war is not simply more. It is more the same way. Interchangeability is a moral law, a bogey from plant. A bolts onto a hull from plant B. A turret ring machined in daylight aligns with teeth cut on a night shift 2 states away. Drawings become contracts with the future. Tolerances widen where they can, tighten where they must, so that multiple vendors can practice the same sentence without tripping on the commas. Engineers design not just for performance, but for obedience to the line, to the depot, to the man in a muddy jacket, trying to read a parts list by flashlight. Cadence is engineered. At Detroit, arsenal tack time is a drumbeat that turns metal into schedule. At Fisher, body fixtures lock geometry, so skill is additive rather than prerequisite. Process sheets carry the lore that in other cultures lives only in the wrists of masters. Statistical checks catch drift early, so deviation is managed in print before it becomes tragedy in the field. A change order does not ripple like a storm. It propagates like a memo, boring, traceable, survivable. The factory becomes a choir that expects to sing at 3 a.m. Multi-sourcing converts risk into redundancy. If alloy shipments stumble, a cast alternative stands in. If a gearbox vendor misses quota, another family of engines slots under the same deck plates with adapters designed on purpose months ago. The M4 is not a single tank so much as a platform written in a friendly dialect. You can teach it new nouns, guns, suspensions, radios without changing its grammar. Crews notice when upgrades arrive as kits that bolt to familiar holes. Mechanics notice when a job measured in days becomes an hour told in jokes. Reliability is not magic. It is choices repeated. Wet stowage appears because fires teach faster than pride. Powertrains get revised because open roads burn bearings. Filtration improves because desert hates romance. None of these revisions require a council of elders. They require paperwork that moves as fast as railcars. The medium tank grows better without stopping the line because the line was drawn with improvement in mind. And logistics is allowed to be loud. Rail spurs kiss factory gates. Cranes lift by the dozens rather than the few. Dock crews practice a ballet with cargo nets that lands hulls where staff planners dreamed they would be. Shipping tables speak in weeks, not miracles. When a battalion commander reports 3 losses by noon, a replacement officer answers with car numbers and arrival times, not condolences. The American answer to the untold problem is indecently practical. Make a machine that a democracy can keep supplied. Choose maintainability over mystique, cadence over charisma, families of parts over families of legends. In that choice, the medium tank becomes more than a silhouette on a battlefield. It becomes a promise between a nation and its soldiers that tomorrow morning, when the map points forward, something will be fueled, armed, radioed, and ready to go. Quantity is not contempt for quality. It is respect for time. June 1942. Detroit. Arsenal Tank Plant, Warren, Michigan. The first thing that strikes you is not the heat or the smell of cutting oil. It's the rhythm. Cranes glide in arcs they've traced 1,000 times. Fixtures kiss steel in exactly the same places. Riveters and welders move as if each station remembers yesterday's shift. This is where the impossible idea was made ordinary: build a complex, armored, tracked fighting machine with the same obedience to schedule as a city bus. The heresy is not speed. It's sameness, and sameness at a scale no general ever put in a field order. The American industrial transformation did not begin with a miracle. It began with a meeting. William Knudsen, the manufacturing savant drafted from GM, spoke the new language to factory floor and cabinet room alike: tact time fixtures, interchangeable tooling, multi-sourcing. At Chrysler, KT Keller turned the Detroit arsenal into a cathedral of repetition, where jigs imposed geometry, so skill could become additive instead of exclusive. Across the outskirts of Detroit, Fisher Body's Grand Blanc arsenal spun up turret machining like a metronome, not a rite. In Lima, Ohio, in Berwick, Pennsylvania, in plants that had once stamped fenders and refrigerator doors, engineers taught steel to keep appointments. The breakthrough was philosophical before it was mechanical design for production, not around it. Drawings became promises to the future. Wherever a master's touch could be replaced by a gauge block, it was. Wherever two vendors could qualify for the same dimension, they did. Armor plates were specified not merely for thickness and hardness, but for weldability under shop realities, heat inputs that a second-shift apprentice could repeat without inventing a new religion. Subassemblies became families with shared holes, shared fastener sets, shared lift points, shared test procedures. A bogie from Plant A had to bolt to a hull from Plant B in a rainstorm at midnight, by design, not luck. At the line level, the impossible looked like the ordinary done with moral intensity. Fixtures prevented the quiet drift that turns assembly into art. Go, no-go gauges embarrassed parts that wanted to lie about being in spec. Process travelers, the paper dossiers that accompany every component, made each piece legible to strangers, so a powertrain could cross state lines and still feel at home. Statistical checks, still young in American plants, were weaponized against variation. A pattern that hinted at toolwear was corrected on Thursday, so a Friday morning tank did not carry a Tuesday mistake into combat. Dates mattered. In the summer of 1942, everything felt like a race with fog. North Africa was calling. Training centers were gulping machines faster than railcars could bring them. The doctrine for how to fight with a medium tank was still clarifying as the ships sailed. The answer was not perfection, it was cadence. Keller's foreman performed small miracles that no newspaper would print. A weld seam moved half an inch to speed a fixture change. A turret ring backlog disappeared because a second supplier was taught the cut pattern and the deburr sequence. An engine family change was absorbed with adapter plates that had been designed before anyone admitted they would be needed. The line did not flinch. It absorbed. Other places and dates feed the same river. January 1943. Grand Blanc turret shells rotated under calibrated torque until bearing preload sat in the Goldilocks zone every time. March 1943. Pressed Steel Car Company. Pennsylvania hull sections arrived in matched kits, serials married before the first arc struck, so nobody hunted for a plate on a Monday that a truck dropped on a Sunday. April 1943, Springfield Armory and radio vendors in New Jersey communications suites standardized pinouts so harnesses arrived like sentences, not riddles. The geography looks chaotic on a wall map. In the logic of the schedule, it is a single organism. The people changed with the plants. Women in headscarves learned to read spec sheets the way clerks read ledgers. A woman could walk a line and hear a grinder singing off-key and know the wheel needed dressing before the dimensional chart tattled. Foremen stopped hoarding lore and started teaching classes because the only way to keep schedule was to manufacture skill in parallel with steel. The Union Hall and the quartermaster's office found themselves in the same story. If the shift couldn't hold, the convoy couldn't sail. And then the strange, decisive calm of proof, a train of flat cars rolling out at night with hulls chained down in neat ranks, numbers that would look like fantasy to any army of 1918. The idea that had seemed indecent in 1940, armored warfare supplied as if it were consumer goods, was now a lighted rail yard, a conductor checking a manifest, a switchman throwing a lever. The plant was no longer a place. It was a cadence that extended from ore dock to beachhead. The impossible idea was not that America could build tanks. It was that America could build tanks, predictably upgrade them without stopping, and deliver them as if the front were just another customer with a tight deadline. By autumn 1943, the proof was audible. The line's music stayed on tempo even when a vendor missed a week. The drawing control board absorbed an improvement without tearing holes in yesterday's inventory. A depot in England opened crates and found parts that made it on the first try. The genius was not a single inventor or a single plant. It was a conspiracy of honest paperwork, obedient steel, teachable hands, and a schedule that treated war as the ultimate customer. The miracle repeated ceased to be a miracle. That was the point. Start with a ratio and let it sting. Germany fields roughly 1,300-odd Tigers across the whole war. The United States rolls out on the order of 49,000 Shermans. That is not a comparison of machines. It is a measurement of manufacturing philosophies. Put it another way, for every Tiger that arrives, dozens of Shermans exist somewhere in the pipeline, on test tracks, in crates, on ships, on sidings, in depots, on roads. The battlefield sees only what climbs a hedgerow. The war is decided by what is waiting 2 weeks behind it. Production rate first. German heavy tank output pulses, interrupted by air raids, by alloy hunger, by tool damage that requires artisans and time. American medium tank output learns to flow. A U.S. arsenal could count completions in daily tallies that actually meant something to rail schedulers. When the line hit a snag, the snag was documented, addressed, and amortized across multiple vendors so it would not recur with biblical authority. The curve that matters, the one economists draw on napkins, steepened, then held. In practical terms, that meant a battalion's losses on Tuesday had a known answer by Friday. Cycle time next. The Tiger's cycle began with intentions and ended with a near masterpiece. Between those poles stretched man-hours folded into high-tolerance assemblies everyone was terrified to disturb. The Sherman's cycle trimmed decision points until nothing required a council of elders. If a hole pattern drifted, the fixture corrected it. If a casting ran heavy, the machining plan expected the weight and swept it into chips. If a supplier went dark, a second part number had already been taught the dance. Time left the process as paperwork, not prayer. Cost was both coin and opportunity. The German heavy drew scarce alloys, scarce optics, scarce tempering capacity, and scarce man-hours into a single object that, once lost, could not be easily replaced without ripples across the economy of war. The American medium drank cheaper materials in bigger gulps, insisted on fasteners and seals that railcars could carry by the ton, and most important, paid for future changes up front by making interfaces generous and standardized. Cheap here does not mean bad. It means reproducible on demand, the only currency a global war truly accepts. Maintenance and availability, the unglamorous twins, turned ratios into realities. In Axis workshops, a heavy final drive or gearbox swap could be a saga, the machine hostage to a part that might be 100 kilometers and 2 air raids away. In Allied depots, a powertrain change was taught as a drill with slings and stands and torque specs that lived on laminated cards. The Sherman's subassemblies were sized as much for hands and cranes as for calculations. Availability is strategy disguised as a checklist. A formation that reports 85% ready week after week will inherit the battlefield from a formation that reports 60, even if the latter's survivors can win duels. Upgrade path is where the secret sauce starts to taste like foresight. Because the Sherman was designed as a platform, not a monument, it accepted new guns, new turrets, new stowage, new suspensions, and new radios without having to renegotiate its identity. That means the production line did not have to die to make the field smarter. British Fireflies learned to talk to American mediums because the bolt circles and the wiring looms were written in a common grammar. Wet ammunition stowage arrived as a kit, not a revolution. Lessons from Sicily could walk into Normandy wearing a new mantlet. Risk dispersion is the dark art behind the daylight numbers. A German heat treatment furnace lost to a raid removed a critical note from an already thin orchestra. An American jig lost to a fire was serious but survivable because the score lived in multiple shops, and the tooling drawings lived in multiple file cabinets, and increasingly in multiple minds. Redundancy is expensive to imagine and cheap to use. In 1944, the United States paid the imagination bill and cashed redundancy checks all the way to the Rhine. Now stack the indices the way a planner would. Throughput, the Allied curve overwhelms the Axis curve by an order of magnitude in the classes of vehicles that fight most often. Lead time, Allied days per unit contracts steadily. Axis days per unit stretch whenever a specialist is pulled to fix yesterday's miracle. Unit availability. Allied formations stabilize at high readiness percentages. Axis heavy units oscillate with the health of their drivetrains and the mood of the railnet. Upgrade velocity. Allied changes propagate across fleets without stopping the line. Axis changes live and die at the workshop level, or require redesigns that take months the front will not donate. Finally, consider the killer metric no one prints on propaganda posters: replacement latency. How long between a combat loss and a combat-ready replacement rolling under a commander's hand? For the side with synchronized factories, ports, railheads, depots, and training schools, the answer was measured in schedules, not size. For the side without the answer was often a shrug followed by a heroic order to hold anyway. This is why unlimited capacity is not only an economic boast, but a battlefield key. Capacity converts doctrine into persistence. It takes a bad day and denies it the power to become a bad month. It lets tactics be aggressive because the machine can afford learning. It licenses commanders to mass, to experiment, to sustain pressure, to be wrong on Tuesday and still be dangerous on Thursday. Quality matters profoundly, but without capacity. Quality is a rumor that runs out of fuel. The secret sauce ladled over every decision from drawing board to beachhead was mercilessly simple: design the tank, so a democracy can keep it coming. 25. July 1944. St. Lo, Normandy. Dawn is a seam ripper through a sky still holding the heat of 1,000 bombers. The hedgerows steam. The roads sweat tar. The air tastes like powder and turned soil. At H-hour for Operation Cobra, the American medium tank ceases to be a silhouette and becomes a weather system. Columns of M4s idle in cut lanes, exhaust pulsing like animal breath. Crews sit high on turrets, chewing nerves into gum, waiting for the artillery timetable to finish writing the first sentence of the day. When the barrage lifts, the choreography is not elegant. It is inevitable. Bulldozers shove gaps where hedges had pretended to be walls for 8 weeks. Infantry flows to the flanks of the tanks like shadow. The first Shermans jump forward in twos guns, searching the black mouths of field corners. A German 75 speaks from a sunken lane. The lead M4 shrugs into smoke. A second swings wide and punishes the muzzle flash. There is no duel, only the arithmetic of angles of who can place more steel at more points in less time. By mid-morning, the lanes are no longer lanes, but a braid of dust and decisions. The radio net hums with the vocabulary of persistence: throw a bridge here, track off and back on smoke. The right TDs hold the long field replacement company inbound. From the hedgerows, the enemy kills with skill and dies with dignity, and still the shapes keep coming. A battalion commander loses 4 machines before noon and discovers that the new reality does not end there. By evening, he is briefed on railcars, serial numbers, and arrival times. The line has learned how to answer loss with schedule. 3. August of Ranches, the gateway. The medium tank sprint begins. In the heat shimmer, the M4s look like a rumor. Then they are thunder. The breakout is not a single charge, but a conveyor belt of combat power tanks, tank destroyers, half-tracks, trucks, maintenance crews, recovery vehicles, ambulances, and the quiet geniuses with clipboards who keep fuel from becoming a myth. Every evening, the columns pull off one after another, like trains switching to sidings. Every morning they reappear, fueled-fed parts swapped, hatches slammed. The machine does not care about romance. It cares about cadence. 7-12 August. Morton. A counterblow comes hard enough to be remembered as a name. Panzer silhouettes surge out of the mist toward Hill 314 and beyond. German radios speak in promises. American radios reply with coordinates. The Shermans are not alone. Artillery speaks in battalion salvos, liaison planes sketch grids in pencil-thin contrails, and fighter bombers stitch the roads. The M4s do not win by swagger. They win by showing up together again and again, with TDs stalking the flanks and infantry catching the knives that tanks cannot feel. In the orchard fights in the sudden alleyways of Norman fields, you can hear the doctrine maturing under fire: pin flank, smoke mass, call the guns push before memory resets. The road signs begin to change. Brittany, Le Mans, Argentan. The map opens like a window, and the medium tank turns from hedgerow knife to roadrunner. You can trace the logistics in the dust. Red Ball Express convoys infile gasoline in 5-gallon can pyramids, ordnance depots that smell like cosmoline and rain. When an M4 throws a track, a crewman reaches for the same tools the next crewman will reach for 2 hours later, 50 miles away. When a gun tube cooks off a round that should not have been asked for the replacement, arrives as a kit with fasteners that fit the holes that were drawn to fit the fasteners. 19 to 29 September. Aricourt, Lorraine. The weather turns gray. The ground opens into long fields, and with them come long lines of sight that punish the careless. German armor hunting a breakout of its own bumps into the 4th Armored Division's reflexes. In morning mists that smother optics and make range cards into prayers, Shermans work in platoon spirals. One section draws fire, another circles. Tank destroyers linger just behind the slanted barns, waiting for a muzzle flash to write them an invitation. The fight is surgical and savage. M4s burn, Panthers burn. The countryside learns new terrible colors. What changes now is not lethality. Both sides have that in cruel supply. It is the tempo. American mediums leave repair and return inside the same weather. Recovery crews pull the wounded by rote grease and steam, mixing into a smell that becomes a season. Workshops hum in a language that turns disasters into lists: final drive, swap track, block, replace, traverse, motor, test ammo, restow, wet. German heavies, once damaged, can be captives to a part. A truck, a certainty that does not arrive. Reports from the enemy read like regret carved into forms. Reports from the Americans read like errands checked off with muddy thumbs. The men inside the M4s are not abstractions. They are young and tired, and sometimes terrified. They learn the hedgerow whisper how to feel when a ditch is too deep. The urban shout, how to force a street into an angle. The open field breath, how to move when fog turns the world into a room with invisible furniture. They learn each other's voices on the net. They accumulate the primitive graces that keep a tank alive. Never show your belly where the long gun can see it. Trust the guy with the binoculars who says the glint is wrong. Believe the recovery sergeant when he calls a halt to fix a track before it becomes a funeral. Normandy gives way to France, France to the borders of a nation running out of nouns to rename defeat. Through it all, the medium tank keeps its promise. It is present. Its gun grows longer where doctrine demands it. Its stowage grows safer where experience demands it. Its radios grow clearer where chaos demands it. The silhouette stays familiar, so the supply chain stays honest. The crews grow older by months that feel like years. The formations grow stronger by weeks that feel like habit. If you want a single frame to understand this chapter, choose not a kill cam, but a sidetrack in twilight. 6. Shermans with engines off, crews eating from mess kits, a recovery vehicle yawning its boom, a TD idling like a wolf in the tree line, a quarter-ton truck sliding up with a crate of something that looks like tomorrow. A lieutenant checks a map against a wristwatch and hears a train far away. The sound has nothing to do with romance and everything to do with victory. The train is bringing more of the same. When the columns move again, the earth trembles in a bass line felt in basements and cellars, and the bones of men who have not slept enough. The American medium tank, Weapon B in some staff paper, has become less a weapon than a verb. It arrives. It persists. It returns. Trial by fire, then trial by schedule, then trial by exhaustion, passed the only way a democracy can pass such tests together at scale on time. Write this scene from the other side of the gun sight. A German company CP under apple trees near Mortain. A field telephone that has learned to ring with bad news, a captain whose hands have started to shake only when no one watches. He peers through binoculars that still make the world look precise and sees something imprecise and terrible. Not a spearhead, but a crowd, tanks, trucks, half-tracks, and a river of dust that does not end at the horizon. He reports contacts in the old grammar types, numbers, bearings. The adjutant writes them down and the paper looks like a rumor that forgot to stop. At first the feeling is professional. We can kill these. We have before. The gunnery tables still work. The 88 has authority. The crews are good. A panther in ambush lights an M4 at 600 meters, and the captain feels the old certainty return like a song remembered from peacetime. Then the counterpoint begins. 2 more American tanks slide out of smoke, as if summoned by the burning one. Infantry that you did not plan for appears out of a ditch with bazookas and radios, and a commander who talks to someone you cannot see. Artillery lays a curtain you did not request, and could not pay for if you wanted it. The certainty stutters. You kill, they replace. You reposition, they reappear. The reports acquire a tone the captain has never liked to read. Availability complaints with teeth. Final drives heat soak into failures. Rails that once brought salvation now bring ashes. Fuel drums arrive thinner and farther between. A replacement tank is a promise that does not always keep itself. When the maintenance chief says we can cannibalize everyone, here's we are cannibalizing. A list of missing parts becomes a litany. The weather becomes an enemy. The sky, once neutral, becomes noisy with liaison planes that seem unkillable by boredom alone. Every hill has a pair of American binoculars on it. Every road is a habit they intend to keep. Aracourt writes the realization more clearly than any chalkboard. The mists that should have been an ally hiding the approach, confusing the range, betray instead. The Americans do not need long aristocratic shots today. They need reaction time and radios, and they have both in quantities that feel obscene. A panther lurches out of fog into a platoon that is already in a wedge you cannot see until it bites. A TD patient as spite sits glassed in behind a barn, then punctuates the morning with a shot like a judge's gavel. Your map annotated with arrows that looked sharp at 0400 now looks like a child's drawing under rain. The captain inventories his fears and finds new ones. It is not only that the enemy has many tanks, it is that the enemy's tanks exist inside a system that refuses to tire. When one burns, another arrives with a crew that knows the local net, the local supply sergeant, the local joke. When your gunner's periscope cracks, the part is a letter to a depot that might be a crater by now. When their gunner's periscope cracks, a crate appears like a conjurer's trick. You begin to feel that you are not fighting men, but a factory with a flag. He reads captured leaflets and shakes his head at the brag of numbers American propaganda trying too hard. Then he watches a road all afternoon and learns the primal truth of warfare. The leaflets were only repeating. A schedule is a weapon. The American columns move with the bored competence of clerks who know their jobs. They halt and eat and refuel and laugh and push on. When one column tangles, the next column detours, and the road never truly closes. He wonders what their staff meetings sound like, whether they are allowed to be angry about delays, in the comfortable way his own staff is forced to be resigned about shortages. In the foxholes and turrets of his company, there is talk that has no place in reports. The feeling that the enemy is writing the day and letting you make corrections only in the margins. The gunner who made a perfect shot in the morning feels cheated by afternoon. The driver whose hands used to be a cat's paws now feels he is rowing uphill through wet cement. The loader stops admiring the brass polish of spent casings and starts counting shells with a clench in his jaw. The quartermaster's visit becomes a kind of funeral with invoices. Mortain is supposed to be a restoration of narrative. We counterattack, we cut the head off the snake. We prove the old words still command reality. Instead, fighter-bombers arrive like punctuation. Artillery edits whole paragraphs of the countryside, and Shermans, contemptible in legend, meaningful in mass, insist on being present wherever presence hurts most. The captain learns a sentence he will not forget. The other side can afford to be wrong for a day. We cannot afford to be wrong for an hour. After action, the survivors clean optics with shirts that once had colors. They write the names of lost friends on the insides of hatches. They listen to the battalion net distill the day into abstractions, kilometers, yielded tanks, lost positions, traded. No one says the thing that everyone has begun to suspect: this war is a furnace that rewards the side that feeds it fastest. Excellence, once a talisman, begins to feel like a luxury good. The captain stops using the word best in briefings. He starts using enough and cannot keep the bitterness out of his mouth. By winter, the realization has metastasized. In workshops that smell like defeat, warmed-over crews fight their machines as much as they fight the enemy. Wrestling final drives, bargaining with bearings, cursing shipments that miss by a day, and condemn a platoon to irrelevance for a week. In the same hours on the other side of a border now poorly defended by time, American depots inventory, a boredom that looks like grace racks of parts in bins with numbers that match, crates with seals still unbroken, a bulletin board with a new directive that improves a thing without causing a crisis. Your mind begins to measure distances not in kilometers but in repair hours you cannot pay. If you want one image for the Axis realization, keep it small and human. A Panzer crewman's sleeve rolled grease to the elbow, looking up as a rumble approaches. He expects freight salvation, some reprieve. What he sees is another American column sliding past the hedgerow gap he and his mates built with shovels at midnight. They wave at a boy on a bicycle. The last vehicle in that column is a recovery wrecker, with its boom up and its crew smoking, as if they are already on their next job. The crewman realizes his day has been forecast without him. The captain writes in his field notebook one night by the light of a hooded torch, "We were not beaten by a tank. We were beaten by the knowledge that they will always have another one, and another, and another, and men to sit in them, and fuel to burn in them, and roads to carry them, and time to waste them. We are running out of names for this." He closes the book when the guns begin again. The noise is a language he still speaks. The meaning has changed. What terrifies him now is no longer the long shot from a hedgerow or the sudden shape in mist. It is the fatigue that never lifts the agenda written elsewhere, the intuition, finally, that his courage has been mortgaged to a factory that cannot keep its promises. In the morning, he will fight as hard as yesterday. By evening, he will have learned the same lesson again. In a war of attrition, the side that can replace reality faster decides what reality is. In the end, strategy is the art of turning time into force. The Allies did it by industrializing time. Once the American line reached tempo, factories synchronized to railheads, railheads to ports, ports to depots, depots to units. The battlefield ceased to be a contest of single encounters and became a contest of replenishment cycles. German excellence, real and lethal, drowned in a calendar it could not command. A tiger could dominate a field. It could not dominate a quarter. A quarter belonged to the side that refilled its order of battle reliably, predictably, without begging the gods. The production gap metastasized into every metric that matters. Readiness rates stayed high in Allied formations because maintenance was taught as ritual and supplied as habit. Operational tempo stayed cruel because replacements of crews of engines of entire vehicles arrived on schedules that battalion clerks could recite like prayers. Doctrine hardened around this certainty mass maneuver, and pressure were not gambles, they were obligations. You pushed because you could afford to learn by pushing. On the Axis side, brilliance kept finding itself broke. Each loss had an echo time in workshops that lacked a bearing, trains delayed by cratered junctions, fuel rationed by hope. Even victories began to feel like unpayable loans. A perfect ambush today was bought with parts and petrol that could not be replaced tomorrow. Technology, once a multiplier, became a hostage too exquisite to build in numbers, too delicate to survive attrition, too slow to iterate, when the front demanded ugly speed. By late 1944, the map tells the truth without adjectives. The armored spearheads that matter run on medium tanks and motorized logistics. The heavies that survive are anecdotes, not instruments. The war narrows to the only question that counts in an industrial conflict: who can keep the promise of ready this morning for the longest? The answer is written in rail schedules, in depot ledgers, in shipping manifests, in the boredom of a parts clerk who knows the bin number by heart. Quality still kills. Capacity decides who gets to keep killing. After the last reports are filed and the last engines cool, the men who built the Axis war machine speak more plainly than they ever did in briefings. Albert Speer, Minister of Armaments, would later admit in substance that Allied output, particularly American, set a scale of production we could not match, and that once their factories were protected by air supremacy, Our technical refinements could no longer compensate. The confession is not romantic. It is logistical. He is saying we lost to a schedule. Senior panzer officers in interrogations and memoirs repeated a similar refrain. Our tanks were often the best on a field, but the enemies were there in numbers there again tomorrow, and repaired faster than ours. One commander's post-war summary reads like a verdict on his own doctrine range, and armor meant little when replacements arrived by the trainload. Luftwaffe leaders, reflecting on the rubble of their fuel system and training pipeline, described a change of weather they could not control once Allied production and logistics synchronized with air power. We lost the initiative forever. Precision could still win duels. Industry won months. Japanese admirals assessing a Pacific bled by submarines and strangled by convoy interdiction noted that America's capacity to replace losses and extend lines of supply converted tactical reverses into strategic non-events. The phrase is bloodless and devastating. None of these lines are excuses. They are acknowledgments that the decisive protagonist was seldom a single weapon. It was a philosophy that made weapons plentiful, fixable, and upgradable under fire. The Axis built masterpieces that demanded a perfect world. The Allies built tools that tolerated the real one. So the final word belongs not to a muzzle report, but to a calendar and a clerk. When asked what beat them, the Axis professionals did not point to a myth. They pointed to numbers, to ships, to rails, to depots, to a machine that rolled forward, not because it was flawless, but because it refused to stop. In a war of attrition, that refusal is the only miracle that matters.